Coming up, please welcome CyberVista cybersecurity expert, Simone Petrella.
You're watching YBL TV.
Let's talk inside a cyber attack, one of my favorite topics. How does a company know that they've been attacked? Is it just by seeing cracks, or do they really see other warning signs that come along the way? How can they tell?
So in actuality, it's usually both. So there are instances where companies do see indicators of malicious activity on their networks. Unfortunately, it is typically an average of over 6 months before a company will typically identify that there is activity on their network that indicates a breach. Even more unfortunate, more often than not, it's actually a company being told that they have been breached by a third party, most often law enforcement. So it's a very difficult thing to ultimately identify when it happens, and then obviously then all the focus shifts on how do you remediate and recover from that incident.
Simone, share with us your role with CyberVista.
I'm the Chief Cyber Strategy Officer at CyberVista, so I'm in charge of our strategic initiatives as well as our product development around the education and training space. We focus on training for executives, both at the board level as well as the C-suite. And in that role, we really look at the literacy executives need in order to make business decisions around how they approach, manage, and oversee cybersecurity issues. And we also provide training programs for cybersecurity practitioners, so those who are actually in the field conducting network defense for their companies, organizations, or agencies.
Are you finding that some of these executives are lacking in some of that literacy?
For us, cybersecurity is 100% a people problem, and it really does start at the top of the organization. And when you look at cybersecurity, just like you would any other component of a company's success, is around their culture. And cybersecurity needs to be part of the culture at the top and make its way down into the organization just as much as we at the grassroots level, whether it's in the actual practitioner space or just even as a consumer, take cybersecurity seriously. So literacy is a massive focus for us, and we do see that executives are certainly very concerned about cybersecurity as an issue, but there's a lot of catching up to do in order to create a level of awareness and comprehension in order to allow them to make the appropriate decisions they need to make in order to manage their businesses with cybersecurity as one of those priorities.
Emails are such a big topic here in security. What can we do besides two-factor authentication?
Yeah, well, I actually think two-factor or multi-factor authentication would go a very long way to actually prevent a lot of what we're seeing in the news now when you look at some of the compromises that have involved email. In almost every single one of those cases, it was a spear phishing incident where someone clicked on a link or had a password that in many cases was password. It's still the most commonly used password. So I think those are some really critical steps that need to be taken, and it's also about practicing vigilance. You know, literacy and awareness comes down to also each of us as individuals have a responsibility to be accountable and trust that what we're getting is valid, but then verify it. And so the reality is not everything you receive in your email is going to be something that's what it appears to be.
With the recent election and everyone thinking that Russia is somehow part of some hacking that's taken place, how can we find out specifically if they have had any dip into the situation?
Right. Well, I think what you're referring to is unfortunately the rude or the sort of stark issue with trying to create attribution in any sign of cyber attack. People are really searching for a smoking gun. The reality is it's very difficult to find a smoking gun in a cyber attack. What you can do is look at all of the technical information, all of the data, identify which actors were ultimately responsible, which tactics they used, which techniques, what procedures in order to actually conduct the attack. And then you have to look in the context of what are the strategic objectives and goals of that particular adversary. You know, in the case of where we took a look at what happened and the allegations that, you know, Russia has been a part of the U.S. election cycle, it is completely consistent with their strategic goals, objectives, and their decades-long history of doing this type of influence operations against United States assets. So for them to resort to a cyber means in order to do so is just a slightly different blush to the same modus operandi they've used for decades.
Can we talk about some different flavors of cyber attacks? Are there different kind of flavors out there that are more popular than others? Denial of service, etc.?
Absolutely. So there's essentially three things that you can do in the execution of a cyber attack. You can either affect the confidentiality of the data itself. You can impact its integrity, or you can affect its availability. So you can deny someone the availability to access that. As far as what are the most popular, it honestly depends on the threat actor and what they're looking to achieve. One of the attacks in the fall was around the DIN server, which shut down access to most of the internet sites on the East Coast. That was a denial of service attack. What was the intent for that? Was it to monetize? Was it to send a message? That's a very different calculus as far as when a bad actor is making a decision to deny availability of data to someone versus, more of an espionage or, actually exfiltrating information to then use it, whether it's something similar to what you see in the DNC hack or very similar to what we saw back when it was the Sony Entertainment hack, and there were a lot of very embarrassing emails that were released for another intended purpose.
The electrical grid, what potentially can happen of an attack?
Critical infrastructure is definitely a national security interest and one of the most important national security interests that we have, and it is increasingly becoming connected to the internet. So around how do we actually prevent that, it's a lot of what are the industrial control systems and what do they control, what are the stop gaps. The biggest challenge in critical infrastructure is that even just to take computers offline in order to conduct a routine patch can often take up to 48 to 72 hours, which would you want to have your power grid go down because a patch is being updated? Probably not. So availability is of utmost concern in critical infrastructure, which makes it very difficult to balance the cybersecurity needs as we get more and more connected to the grid. The biggest change I've seen from my own background and my experience is actually from the threat intelligence side of the house is there's finally a recognition that it matters who is conducting the attack just as much as it does the technical means, motives, and then ways, methods they use to actually execute those attacks. The reality is you cannot prioritize protecting everything. The threats are way too vast. And so the only way that you can really counter that is by having some level of logical prioritization of who's trying to target you, why they're trying to target you, and what they're trying to target, because then you can prioritize your own defenses. And that is something from a recognition standpoint that has really evolved in the last 10 years.
5 years from now, what's the landscape?
We're going to continue to get more connected, and I think we're going to see the slow catch-up of the regulatory, legal, and policy components that need to kind of all be put into place to actually catch up with the innovations we've had in technology. So not that technology will not continue to advance at a rapid pace, it absolutely will, and we'll have to continue to deal with those new innovations, but we're going to start to see really just an increased discussion, whether it's on the case law and liability issues or whether it's on a focus on product, secure development of code that's built into products from the very beginning. I think that those issues are going to become increasingly a part of businesses and manufacturers' decision and calculus as far as what they're building into the cost multiple in their development of products.